Eli Morgan had always felt most at ease where the sky stretched wide and open. The Arizona plains had shaped his life since childhood. The wind that moved across the tall grass, the slow shadows of clouds passing over red dirt, the distant call of hawks, and the quiet rhythm of cattle grazing had been his closest companions. He grew up in a world where a person was judged by how well they worked, not by how much they spoke. His family had been loving in their own way, but words of affection were rare, and conversations rarely went beyond instructions about chores, weather, and livestock. Because of that, Eli learned to stay quiet, to keep his thoughts inside, to build his life around routine and simple expectations. He worked as a ranch hand on a large property owned by the Callahan family. They treated him well and trusted him with responsibilities. Every morning he woke before sunrise, made black coffee on a small stove, and started his day before the light even reached the horizon. He saddled horses, repaired fences, moved cattle, and checked wells. His life was steady, predictable, and silent, and for a long time he believed that was enough. He told himself that peace and simplicity were the same as happiness. He did not realize he was lonely because loneliness had become normal to him. It was like background noise he no longer heard. One chilly morning, Mr. Callahan came riding up to him while he was checking gate latches along the outer pasture. The older man greeted him briefly, then explained that their neighbors needed help repairing fence lines after a recent storm. The neighbors lived on Apache land, just a few miles north past the ridge and toward the edge of the forest. The Callahans had always kept respectful, friendly relations with them. Sometimes the ranches helped each other, especially when storms or drought made work harder. Mr. Callahan asked Eli to ride out for a few days and lend a hand. Eli nodded without question. Helping was part of the life. Besides, he assumed the work would be similar to what he did every day, quiet and simple. Eli packed a bedroll, extra shirts, and enough dry food to last until he returned. He saddled his horse, Dusty, and headed north. As he rode, he watched the land change around him. The open plains slowly shifted into stronger colors. The soil deepened to richer red. Clusters of tall pine trees gathered in the distance, and the air felt cooler. He passed small wildflowers growing in patches along the trail. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke, telling him someone nearby was cooking or keeping warm. The land itself felt different from where he usually worked. Not better or worse, just lived indifferently, with care that could be seen in the way certain plants were left untouched, and certain paths looked thoughtfully walked. When Eli arrived at the ranch, he was greeted not by men but by 4 women. They stood near a corral working with quiet confidence. One adjusted the rope on a young horse, calming it with steady hands. Another was patching a section of broken fencing. 2 others were sorting tools. They all looked strong from outdoor work, but each had her own way of carrying herself. They were sisters. He would learn their names later. Maria, the oldest and calmest. Lena, the one with a sharp sense of humor. Tessa, gentle and observant. And June, the youngest, who seemed to see everything and forget nothing. They stopped what they were doing when they saw Eli ride in. He introduced himself simply the way he knew. They nodded in greeting. The sisters did not treat him like a stranger, but they also did not treat him like someone to be overly impressed by. They welcomed him the same way they might welcome rain on a dry afternoon, naturally, without excitement or hesitation. To Eli, this felt both surprising and strangely comforting. He was used to being unnoticed, but here he felt seen without being judged. Maria showed him where he could tie his horse and where he could keep his gear. The ranch house was modest, neat, and full of small signs of care. Hand-woven blankets, photographs of family gatherings, bundles of dried herbs hanging near the window, and shelves that looked well used rather than decorated. They offered him food, beans, warm bread, and a bit of roasted corn. Eli ate quietly, unsure what to talk about. The sisters, however, were comfortable with silence. They spoke to each other softly, in both English and their own language, moving around one another the way people do when they are close and familiar. Once they finished eating, they all headed out to work on the fence line. Eli expected to take the lead, since fence repair was something he had done countless times. But he soon realized that these women knew exactly what they were doing. Their movements were practiced and efficient. They lifted, measured, tied, and hammered with precision. He helped where needed, but he did not need to direct anything. They worked as a team that had learned from both elders and the land itself. As they worked, the sisters talked, sometimes joking, sometimes serious, but always with purpose. They told stories about growing up together, about learning from their grandparents, about how the land held memories. Eli listened quietly. He did not know how to join conversations like that. He had never been taught to share personal stories casually. He had never been part of a group that spoke so openly about feelings, family, or purpose. He felt like he had been living behind a closed door for most of his life, and now he was just beginning to realize there had been a door at all. Yet the sisters did not treat his quietness as shyness or rudeness. They simply accepted it. When he spoke, they listened. When he did not, they did not push him. Their ease and confidence created a space where silence did not feel empty. The day passed like that. Steady work, clear sky, gentle conversations. By the time the sun began to set, painting the land in warm shades of orange and rose, Eli felt something shift inside him, though he could not yet name it. The sky here looked the same as the sky on the Callahan Ranch, but somehow he experienced it differently. It felt less like something he was working under and more like something he was a part of. That evening, as everyone sat around a small fire outside drinking warm tea, the sisters began telling stories of their family history. They spoke of grandparents who taught them to honor the land by understanding it, not by controlling it. They spoke of their community, of the responsibility to take care of each other, and of the belief that every person has a purpose that must be chosen, not simply accepted by habit. Eli listened in silence, his heart heavy but not in a painful way. It was heavy in the way one feels when realizing something important has been missing for a very long time. He had never known life could hold meaning outside of work and survival. He had never questioned whether peace and isolation were the same thing. That night, under the open sky, he began to wonder if he had ever truly lived at all. The next morning began quietly. Soft morning light stretched across the land, touching the tops of trees and glowing gently against the red earth. Eli woke early out of habit and stepped outside the small cabin where he had slept. The air was cool, carrying the fresh scent of pine and distant wood smoke. It was peaceful in a different way than his home ranch. It felt peaceful because everything here seemed to move with intention. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. He found the four sisters already awake. Maria and Tessa were preparing breakfast outdoors, cooking slowly over a small flame, while Lena and June were brushing down horses and checking their hooves. Their work had rhythm, almost like music formed from motions instead of sound. Eli felt slightly unsure of where to step among them. He had spent years working with men who talked little and moved quickly. Here things were done with patience and awareness. When Maria noticed him standing nearby, she offered a warm smile and handed him a tin cup of tea. The tea tasted of something earthy and calming. Eli thanked her with a quiet nod, unsure how else to express his appreciation. The sisters did not fill silence with unnecessary talk. They allowed space to simply exist. It was something new to Eli. In his usual world, silence happened because people did not know what to say. Here, silence was comfortable, almost like an old friend sitting among them. After breakfast, they prepared to continue the fence repairs. The storm that had damaged the fencing had not been severe, but long stretches of the line needed checking. This meant riding out together to cover miles of land that stretched along the border of the ranch. Eli saddled Dusty and the others saddled their own horses. The group rode in an easy formation, sometimes side by side, sometimes in a loose line, depending on the way the land shaped itself. As they rode, the sisters talked softly with one another. Lena told a humorous story about something that had happened during last year's harvest. June added details with enthusiasm, making the older sisters laugh. Their laughter was free and bright, filling the air around them. Eli found himself smiling, even though he did not fully understand the context of their story. He liked how their voices sounded, full of connection and shared history. They reached the broken section of fence by late morning. The fence had been damaged where a fallen tree limb had pressed it down. Eli stepped down from his horse and examined the posts. He knew how to fix it efficiently. In his old habits, he might have simply done the entire repair alone, wordlessly to prove his usefulness. But the sisters did not treat work as a test. They treated it as something done best together. Without needing to discuss roles, each person took on a part. Tessa measured the replacement wire. June held the posts steady while Maria aligned them. Lena gathered tools. Eli cut sections of wire with careful precision. Their teamwork felt balanced, almost natural. He did not lead. He did not follow. He simply worked alongside. As the fence came back into shape, the feeling of being unsure slowly loosened in Eli's chest. He began to speak more, asking questions about the land and their work. The sisters responded openly, explaining how their father and grandfather had taught them to care for the ranch. They shared stories about growing up learning to ride horses before they could write their names, about gathering herbs from the hills, about how every plant and stone had meaning when seen with attention. Eli listened carefully. The way they spoke about land made him realize he had always treated the land as something to work on, not something to understand. He had always known how to mend fences, guide cattle, and watch the weather, but he had never considered the land something alive. Here, land was not just space. It was history, memory, family. Around midday, they took a break beneath the shade of a small cluster of cottonwood trees. They shared bread, dried fruit, and cool water from canteens. June pointed out different birds passing overhead, naming each one with ease. Lena told Eli the meaning behind the patterns carved into one of the fence posts near them, how it marked a boundary not just of property, but of story. He was surprised that something as simple as a fence post could hold meaning beyond its function. Eli began to notice his own quietness differently. Before, silence had been a shield. Here, silence felt like a doorway that opened when needed. He did not feel pressure to perform or impress. He felt that he could be exactly who he was, even if he did not yet fully understand who that was. Later in the afternoon, they reached another stretch of land where the fence seemed intact. They rode along in a calm line, the horses walking at an easy pace. The land opened widely here. Rolling hills met open sky and the horizon seemed endless. The group stopped at a ridge to rest the horses. The sisters sat together on a flat stone ledge and Eli joined them. The wind blew gently across the ridge, carrying sounds of distant birds. The moment felt peaceful and whole. It was then that Lena began a conversation that would stay with Eli long after. She spoke about purpose, not in a dramatic or philosophical way, but in a simple, honest tone. She said that every person wakes up each day with choices, to care or not care, to give effort or not, to walk towards something meaningful or away from it. She shared that their family believed every person should know what their heart is guiding them toward, because without that knowledge, a person might move through life without truly living it. June added softly that life becomes heavy when someone only repeats what yesterday required, without understanding why. Tessa spoke about how people sometimes forget they are allowed to choose a new beginning at any time. Maria, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, said that a person's life is shaped not by what they do once, but by what they choose every day. They spoke calmly, gently, without directing their words at Eli. They were simply sharing, yet every sentence seemed to land in him like a small light slowly waking in the dark. Eli realized he had never asked himself why he lived the way he did. He had followed the path given to him, not because it was meaningful, but because it was familiar. He worked hard because that was what he knew. He remained quiet because that was what he learned. He had never questioned if there was more to him than routine. As he sat on the ridge beside the sisters, he felt something stir in his chest. Not sadness, not regret, but recognition. He began to understand that the stillness inside him was not contentment. It was emptiness. A quiet life is not the same as a full one. The sun began its slow descent, coloring the sky in warm gold. The group rode back to the ranch, moving at an easy pace. No one spoke much on the ride. The conversation from the ridge lingered, gently settling into Eli's thoughts like dust after movement. That evening, after dinner, Eli sat outside alone for a while. He watched the sky turn from gold to soft blue, then to deep violet. Stars emerged one by one, steady and patient. He thought about every year he had lived, all the work he had done, the long days and quiet nights. He wondered why he had never asked himself what he wanted. Instead of simply doing what was expected, he realized something new and clear. A person can work hard every day and still never truly know themselves. The realization did not frighten him. It humbled him. It softened him. He was beginning to open. The next few days passed in a soft rhythm. almost like a quiet song that repeated just enough to feel familiar without becoming dull. Each morning, Eli woke before sunrise, stepping out into cool air, hearing birds beginning their first calls of the day. The sisters would already be up, either preparing food, tending to horses, or gathering tools. Their days were filled with steady effort, shared work, and gentle conversation. Eli worked beside them, learning not just tasks but presence. He found himself noticing details he had never paid attention to before. The way the sky changed color slowly as the sun rose, the variety of shapes and shades in the distant mountains, the subtle shifts in wind direction and what those changes might mean. The land felt alive in a way he had not recognized before coming here. It was as though the sisters had taught him how to see, not with his eyes alone but with patience and respect. But even in this calm, something inside him was shifting, slowly but undeniably. He felt it, a quiet questioning inside his chest, a question he had never asked himself before. What does my life really mean? He kept this question close, turning it over in his thoughts the way one might hold a small stone in their palm, unsure yet if it was meant to be kept or returned to the earth. One afternoon, they rode to check the water troughs and make sure the lines were clear. The day was warm but not hot. The sky was open and endless. The land stretched far in every direction, untouched and wide. As they rode, June began humming a tune, simple and soothing. Tessa joined her softly, and soon the sound of their quiet humming mixed with the sound of hooves on dry ground. Eli listened, feeling something gentle open inside his chest. The melody reminded him of something he could not name, something warm, something he felt he once knew but had forgotten a long time ago. When they reached the ridge they had rested at before, the group stopped again. This ridge had become a kind of resting place, a place where the land seemed to breathe deeply. The sky here seemed larger. The horizon seemed farther. The silence here felt meaningful. The sisters settled onto the same stones, and Eli joined them without needing an invitation. The wind moved across the ridge again, carrying the scent of sage and warm earth. For a few moments no one spoke. They simply looked out at the world below, calm and still. Then Maria spoke, her voice soft but steady. She said, "Sometimes life waits for a person to notice the questions inside their own heart." She said that a person cannot find direction until they first admit they are lost. She did not say this to Eli directly, but the words seemed to settle deeply inside him, like they had found a place they had been waiting for. Eli's chest felt heavy again, but not in a painful way. It felt heavy, like something important was rising to the surface. He realized that he had never allowed himself to question his path. He had always believed life was something that happened to him, not something he shaped. He had worked hard because that was how he was raised. He had stayed quiet because he never learned how to speak his deeper thoughts. He had accepted loneliness because he believed it was simply part of life. Now, sitting on the ridge, surrounded by 4 people who lived with clarity and purpose, he understood something simple yet profound. He had been living without choosing. Eli took a breath. It felt slow and full, as though this was the first time in a very long time that he allowed air to truly reach him. The sisters waited. They did not rush him. They did not press him. They offered him space as naturally as they offered water or shade. In their presence he felt safe enough to speak. "I don't know who I am," he said quietly. The words surprised him. They were small, but they carried the weight of many years. Maria nodded gently. "Many people discover this," she replied. "It does not mean something is wrong. It means you're waking up." Eli looked at his hands, rough from years of work. He thought of all the mornings he had woken before dawn, all the long days, all the dust and sweat and silence. He had believed this meant he was strong, but now he saw it differently. Strength was not only endurance. Strength was also honesty. Strength was also choosing to change. Lena leaned back on her hands and looked up at the wide sky. She spoke about how every person is born with a voice inside them, a quiet guide that tells them what matters. Some people learn to listen to it early. Others forget it is there. Some never discover it at all. She said there is no shame in starting late. What matters is that a person begins. June spoke next. She said that when someone realizes they have not been living fully, it can feel heavy or confusing. But it is actually a beginning. She said beginnings rarely feel clear. They feel uncertain, like stepping onto land one has never walked before. She told Eli that uncertainty is not weakness. It is movement. Tessa, calm and thoughtful, added that identity is not something a person receives. It is something a person builds, slowly, patiently, through choices, through awareness, through truth. Eli listened, feeling each word settle inside him. It felt as though his life, which had always been flat and steady, had suddenly grown depth and direction. He had not realized how small his world had been until he experienced a larger one. The moment became quiet again. The wind moved gently, and the evening light softened across the land. Eli closed his eyes for a moment. He listened, not to the wind or the sounds around him, but to the quiet inside himself. He tried to hear what had been silent for so many years. He realized something simple. He did not want to go through life unseen, unheard, untouched by meaning. He wanted to live with intention, the way the sisters did. He wanted to make choices that came from his heart, not just from habit. He wanted to know himself. The realization did not fix everything. It did not answer all his questions. It did not give him immediate clarity, but it opened a door, and doors are where journeys begin. As the group rode back home, the sun lowered behind the distant hills. The sky glowed with soft shades of orange and gold. Eli felt quiet but not closed. He felt thoughtful but not troubled. Something inside him had shifted. Something inside him had begun. That night he lay awake beneath a sky full of stars. He watched their soft, steady light blur slightly as his eyes blinked slowly. He thought of his childhood, his parents, the long quiet of his life. He thought of the sisters and the way they carried themselves with both strength and gentleness. He thought of the ridge and the words spoken there. Slowly he understood. A turning point does not always arrive with noise or force. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper that changes everything. Eli closed his eyes and allowed that whisper to stay. His life was no longer something he simply lived. It was something he was beginning to notice. The days after the moment on the ridge felt different to Eli, even though the work itself did not change. The same fences needed mending. The same horses needed brushing. The same meals needed preparing. But something inside him had shifted quietly and permanently. His steps felt more aware. His breath felt fuller. He began living each moment with attention rather than passing through the day without thought. Before, his movements had been automatic. Now he found himself noticing the texture of things he touched, the smoothness of rope, the warmth of a horse's coat under sunlight, the way wood grain swirled naturally across a fence post. He listened with intention, not just to others but to himself, and although he did not yet fully understand what was changing, he could feel that change happening. His nights were different too. He no longer lay down simply to sleep. He lay down and thought about his life, not with regret but with curiosity. He remembered moments from his childhood, times he had enjoyed working with his father in silence, times he had watched stars with his mother outside their small home. He realized he had always loved quiet, but he had not understood that quiet could be shared. He had always believed quiet meant being alone. Here quiet was something made together. One morning while repairing another section of fence, Lena asked Eli about his family. The question was gentle, asked not out of obligation but honest interest. Eli hesitated at first, unsure how to speak about something he had never shared deeply with anyone, but the sisters had created a space where speaking felt safe. He told them about his childhood home, the small ranch, the steady routine of work that shaped every day. He spoke about how his family cared for one another but did not use many words to say so. He described dinners eaten mostly in silence and long days spent working beside his father without conversation. The sisters listened without interrupting, their attention soft and present. When he finished, Maria simply nodded and said, "Your family loved through action." Her words settled in him gently. He had never thought of it that way. He had believed silence meant distance. Now he began to understand that silence could also mean trust. In the days that followed, Eli shared small things he had never said aloud, that he admired his father's dedication, but sometimes wished he had been taught how to speak more openly, that he often felt unsure whether he had done enough, even when he had worked hard all day, that he sometimes felt life was passing him without him truly touching it. The sisters never tried to fix his thoughts. They only listened, offering presence rather than solutions, and this presence began to change him. He started asking questions, not just about the land or the work, but about meaning. He asked how the sisters had learned to understand their purpose so clearly. They explained that purpose was not discovered all at once. It was grown through choices and awareness. They shared how their grandparents had taught them to stop before rushing into anything, to watch the sky and the land, to feel the rhythm of the day, to notice what their heart leaned toward. Purpose, they said, is not something a person finds in the future. It is something a person practices now. Those words followed Eli into every task he did afterward. When he braided rope, he felt its texture instead of rushing through the task. When he cleaned tack, he noticed the soft sounds of leather. When he rode his horse, he breathed in rhythm with the animal beneath him. Everything felt slower, richer, calmer. And slowly, he began to open himself to conversation. Not long speeches, but small moments of honesty. He laughed more. He asked questions. He allowed pauses to be warm instead of uncomfortable. This surprised him. He had always believed he was quiet because he had nothing to say. Now he understood he had simply never been in a place where his words felt welcome. One evening, as the sun turned the sky golden, the group sat outside, eating dinner near the fire pit. The land around them glowed softly. A gentle breeze moved through the air, carrying the scent of warm pine. They were all relaxed, tired from the day's work but content. It was then that Eli felt the full weight of his realization. He had come to this ranch expecting to offer help for a few days. He had thought he would fix fences, do his work, and return to the familiar life he had always known. But now he understood he would not return unchanged. The sisters had not tried to teach him anything. They had simply lived with openness and purpose, and being near them had allowed something inside him to awaken. He realized that his life before had been narrow, not because it was wrong, but because it had never been questioned. He had followed routine without knowing that routine was a choice. He had lived quietly because he believed that was all life allowed. Now he understood that quiet could be full, not empty. That evening, after the meal, the sisters began telling stories of their childhood, the funny ones, the warm ones, the simple ones. They laughed easily, passing memories back and forth. Eli listened, and then for the first time he joined the storytelling. He shared a memory of when he was a child and tried to ride a horse too big for him. The horse had simply stood there, calm and still, while young Eli tried everything to get it to move. His father had laughed quietly, walked over and said, "The horse moves when you do." The sisters smiled warmly at this story, and Lena said, "Your father was teaching you presence before. You knew the word for it." Eli thought about this long, after the laughter faded. The horse moves when you do, life moves when you do. Those words stayed with him. The next morning, when the sisters prepared to ride out again, Eli felt something inside himself settle into clarity. He knew that when he returned to the Callahan Ranch, he could not go back to living the same way. Not because his old life was wrong, but because he was no longer the person he had been when he arrived. He understood now that life is not a straight path someone hands to you. It is something you step into each day with awareness. His time with the sisters was nearing an end. The fence repairs were almost finished. The work he came to help with was nearly done. He could feel the closing of this chapter, like the quiet close of a day. But this ending did not feel sad. It felt like a beginning he would carry wherever he went next. He did not yet know what changes he would make. He did not know what his life would look like when he returned home, but he knew one thing for certain. He would live differently now. He would live with intention. He would live with awareness. He would live with choice. And that was enough. The final morning of Eli's stay arrived with quiet light spreading slowly across the land. The sky was soft and pale, the kind of morning where the day seemed to wake gently rather than rise quickly. Eli stood outside the small cabin where he had slept, holding a cup of tea Maria had handed him. The warmth of the cup pressed softly against his hands. He breathed in the cool air, feeling both peaceful and aware that his time here was coming to a natural close. There was no sadness in the air, only a stillness that came when something meaningful had been understood. The fences had been repaired. The work was complete. His reason for being there, at least on the surface, had ended. Yet he knew the real purpose of his time on the ranch had been something deeper and quieter than fixing wood and wire. It had been about learning how to see his own life clearly, The sisters were speaking quietly nearby as they finished morning chores. June laughed softly at something Lena said. Tessa brushed the mane of her horse with long, steady strokes. Maria stood near the fence looking out at the wide land, her posture relaxed yet strong in its stillness. Eli felt grateful that goodbyes here would not be heavy or dramatic. The sisters seemed to understand that emotions did not need to be expressed loudly to be real. After breakfast, the sisters gathered near the horses, and Eli joined them. His horse, Dusty, waited patiently, ears turning toward him as if sensing the moment. Eli rested his hand lightly on the horse's neck and took a slow breath. Maria stepped forward first. She looked at Eli with calm eyes, the kind that seemed to see more than what was visible. She told him that the land teaches those who slow down enough to listen. She said that every person carries their own rhythm, and sometimes life becomes clearer when we learn to move in harmony with the world instead of rushing through it. Lena smiled in her familiar way, not quick or loud, but with quiet understanding. She told Eli to remember that humor and ease can exist even in hard times, and that life does not have to be as heavy as people often make it. She said that a light heart does not mean a careless one. Tessa, gentle as always, told him that openness is not something learned all at once. It grows slowly as trust grows. She encouraged him to continue speaking honestly, even if it felt uncomfortable at first. She said that speaking from the heart is like opening a window. The first crack of light is small, but once opened, the room can never go dark in the same way again. June stepped closer last. She looked at him not as someone who was leaving, but as someone who had begun a journey of his own. She simply said, "Your voice matters. Use it." Her words were simple, but they held a warmth that reached him deeply. Eli nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His chest felt warm, not heavy. The feeling was not sadness, it was gratitude. It was the quiet kind of gratitude that fills a person without needing expression. He mounted his horse, the saddle familiar and grounding. The sisters stood beside their own horses, watching him with steady smiles, not encouraging him to stay, not pushing him to go, only honoring the moment for what it was. He tipped his hat in a small gesture of respect. The sisters nodded back, each in their own way. Then Eli turned Dusty toward the trail leading away from the ranch. He rode slowly at first, letting the landscape unfold in front of him. The land seemed different now, though it was the same land he had arrived on days earlier. The difference was in him. He noticed the shape of the hills, the movement of the wind through the trees, the way sunlight touched the rocks and brush. He listened, not just to the world around him, but to himself. The ride back to the Callahan ranch took several hours. As he traveled, he found his thoughts moving in a gentle rhythm, like footsteps in soft sand. He did not try to force answers or decisions. He simply reflected. He understood now that change does not need to be loud or sudden. Change can grow quietly, the way morning light slowly expands across the land until the entire day is bright. When he reached the Callahan ranch, the familiar buildings and fields felt different from how he had left them. They had not changed. He had. Mr. Callahan greeted him with a friendly nod and asked how the work had gone. Eli answered simply, saying it went well. The words were true, but they did not carry the fullness of what had happened. Some things are not meant to be described to everyone. Some experiences live best inside the heart of the person who lived them. That evening, Eli returned to his small room in the ranch house. He set his saddle down, washed his hands, and sat quietly on the edge of his bed. The room looked the same, plain walls, a wooden chair, a folded blanket, but the silence inside him was different now. It was not empty. It was calm. He thought of the sisters, not as figures in a memory, but as guides who had shown him another way to exist. They had not changed his life for him. They had shown him that he could change it himself. In the days that followed, Eli did his work as he always had, but with new awareness. He took time to eat meals slowly. He allowed himself to speak when he needed to. He noticed when his chest tightened with old habits of silence, and he breathed through it instead of burying it. He listened to others more closely. He began asking himself questions each morning. What do I want to carry today? What do I want to let go? He found that these small questions gently reshaped each day. He also wrote more, simple notes in a small notebook he kept in his pocket. He wrote about the land, the sky, his thoughts, and the quiet lessons the sisters had shared. Writing helped him hear himself. Weeks passed, and though life continued with work and daily tasks, Eli's internal world was open now. The world outside had not changed, but his experience of it had grown deeper. He realized something important. A person does not need to leave their life to find themselves. They only need to begin participating in their life with presence. The sisters remained in his thoughts often, not as a reminder of something lost, but as a reminder of something found. He knew that their lessons were not finished because the lessons were not tied to them. The lessons were tied to him. One evening, after a long day of work, Eli stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky glowed with warm hues the way it had on the ridge. He breathed slowly and allowed the moment to fill him. He smiled, softly, quietly to himself. His life was not solved. His future was not clear. But something inside him was alive in a way it had not been before. He was not simply living days anymore. He was living. And that was enough.